Democratic and Republican parties, two capitalist political parties with minimal differences and a shared love for theater. We are taught that our democracy is a battlefield of opposing ideologies, blue versus red, progress versus tradition. But if you look past the stage lights and the campaign rallies, you'll see that the opposition is just a controlled illusion. In reality, the United States does not have two parties. It has one party, the Party of Capital, and it has two different marketing departments. To understand why the system is so impenetrable, we have to look at past the myths we were taught in civics class. We are told that the Constitution was written to protect liberty. But we have to ask, liberty for whom?
It's the story of our country, seen through the eyes of two kids. Sarah, who is British.
You'll never take me alive!
And James, who is an American.
Why are you destroying the tea?
They both...
The men who gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 weren't workers, small farmers, or the landless. They were slave owners, land speculators, and merchants. They were the bourgeoisie of their time, and they were terrified of the majority. James Madison, the primary architect of the Constitution, was explicit about this. During the Constitutional Convention, he argued that the government ought to be structured to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. He even saw the Senate as a body of property, to check the Democratic House. To Madison and the other founding fathers, the greatest threat to a stable society wasn't tyranny from a king. It was the threat of the working class using their numbers to demand debt relief or a more equal distribution of property. So, they built a system designed to fragment and slow down the will of the people. They created the Senate, an unelected body at the time, to act as a check for a more volatile House. And they created the Electoral College to ensure that the executive was insulated from popular vote. Sure, the Constitution created democratic mechanisms, but it also embedded barriers designed to insulate property and elite interests from majority rule. The two-party system is simply the modern evolution of that blueprint. It is the final gate in a fortress built 2 centuries ago to ensure that the opulent few never have to answer to the many. Before we go into the modern day, we need to understand the engine currently under the hood, Neo-Liberalism. Neo-Liberalism is a capitalist ideology promoting privatizing everything, deregulating corporations, gutting social spending, and ensuring that capital can flow across borders without any interference from the people. It's important to note that this isn't a new liberalism. It's an attempt at returning to a free market. Under neoliberalism, we've seen the total decoupling of the economy from the worker. In this new era, profit isn't made by creating things or hiring people. It's made through financialization, a system where the economy has been hollowed out into a giant casino of debt and speculation, and where the stock market soars precisely because your wages are being suppressed. Under neoliberalism, corporations discovered they could make more money moving numbers around than producing things. Factories closed, jobs were outsourced, wages stagnated, meanwhile Wall Street exploded. Both parties practice and preach this ideology. To understand why this is, we have to look at the history of it.
A man whose principles have been familiar to Americans for 30 years. A man who's accomplished.
In the mid-20th century, there was a brief period of Keynesianism, the New Deal era. To prevent revolution from below, the state allowed for some social safety nets and labor protections, but the owning class hated this compromise. In the 1970s, as profit margins fell, a group of economists known as the Chicago School began pushing a new doctrine, neoliberalism. They tested it first in Chile. After the CIA overthrow of the democratically elected socialist government in Chile via orchestrated coup, a brutal military dictatorship under Pinochet was installed, using state violence to force free market reforms onto a terrified population. In the 1980s, it came home. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher became the faces of this movement, attacking unions and declaring that the government is the problem. The real victory for the owning class happened in the 1990s, when the opposition gave up. Bill Clinton and the New Democrats officially adopted neoliberalism, passing NAFTA, gutting welfare, and ramping up mass incarcerations. They proved that the project was no longer a Republican thing. It was the only thing. The left wing of capital simply stopped pretending to represent labor and started competing for the same corporate donors as the right.
Let's face it, the dollar just isn't what it used to be. That's why people like you and me, we gotta be careful to get the most value for our money. That's why...
Think about the things they don't debate now. Have you ever noticed that no matter who's in charge, the military budget only ever goes up? Have you noticed that both parties support the same imperialist foreign policy to secure resources for American corporations? When the banks fail, both parties reach for your wallet to bail them out. To maintain the illusion of opposing sides, the system consistently redirects public anger into culture war spectacle. Race, gender, religion, sexuality. Real social issues with real consequences are turned into endless partisan conflict instead of being understood within the material conditions that shape them. These divisions do not emerge from nowhere. They are reinforced through institutions, media narratives, economic inequality, and political incentives that benefit from a fragmented working class. A population fighting internally over identity is less likely to organize collectively around housing, healthcare, wages, or ownership. None of these struggles are mutually exclusive. A worker can be exploited economically while also experiencing racism, sexism, or other discrimination. But the system benefits when these experiences are isolated from broader class solidarity, rather than understood as interconnected. They weaponize real struggles to use as a tool of division to prevent class unity. Even representation itself can be absorbed into the logic of capital. A corporation does not stop exploiting workers because its CEO is diverse. Exploitation with inclusive branding is still exploitation. This is what political scientists call the ratchet effect. The Republican Party acts as a ratchet, clicking the country further to the right, stripping regulations and shifting wealth to the bourgeoisie. The Democratic Party then acts as a stopgap. They don't move the ratchet back to the left, they just hold it in place. They tell us that now is not the time for radical change, maintaining the new, more conservative status quo until the next election, when the ratchet clicks to the right again. But the Democratic Party's role isn't just to hold the ratchet in place, it is to act as a controlled opposition. Think of them as the graveyard where social movements go to die. When a genuine movement rises from the bottom, born from real material desperation, the state doesn't always try to crush it with a baton. Often, it's more effective to infiltrate and disarm it from the inside. Take the 2020 Black Lives Matter uprising, for example. It began as a radical, grassroots rebellion against the structural power of the state. People were in the streets calling for abolition of the prison system and the defunding of the police, demands that represented a direct threat to the status quo. The Democratic Party did not ignore the movement. They performed it. They staged elaborate, performative displays of solidarity while simultaneously voting for increased police budgets. They shifted the language from systematic change to diversity and inclusion. They funneled the energy of the streets into NGOs, turning radical organizers into professionalized, nonprofit consultants. They took the fire that could have burned down the structure and turned it into a campaign ad. By the time the election cycle was over, the movement had been sanitized and redirected back into the voting booth. This is a tactical function of the left wing of capital, to catch the energy of revolution and ground it safely back into the system before it can do any real damage. The system survives because it gives people the feeling of participation without the reality of power. Every 4 years, we are told that this is the most important election of our lifetime. We are told that our democracy lives or dies at the ballot box. That if we just vote hard enough, donate enough, campaign enough, maybe things will finally change. And yet, regardless of who wins, the same corporations grow larger, the same landlords raise rent, the same insurance companies deny healthcare, the same weapons manufacturers profit from endless war, and the same billionaires accumulate more wealth than entire nations. This is because the fundamental structure never changes. You are allowed to choose the manager of the system, but you are never allowed to vote against the system itself. That is the real boundary of American politics. You can debate tax rates, you can debate rhetoric, you can debate which group gets represented in a television commercial or cabinet position. But the moment you challenge private ownership of the economy itself, when you question why a handful of people own the workplaces, the housing, the food supply, the media, and effectively the government, you are pushed outside of the boundaries of acceptable politics. The media calls it radical, politicians call it unrealistic, corporations call it dangerous, not because it cannot work, but because it threatens the people who currently benefit. And this is why both parties react with hostility whenever movements begin organizing along class lines. A worker who sees themselves only as a Democrat or Republican is predictable. A worker who sees themselves as part of an exploited class is dangerous, because class consciousness breaks that illusion. It reveals that the person losing their home in a rural town and the person drowning in rent debt in a major city have more in common with each other than the politicians asking for their vote. It reveals that most of the conflicts pushed to the center of political discourse are carefully selected distractions. Real issues, yes, but discussed in ways that isolate people from each other instead of uniting them against the structures causing their suffering. The system depends on a divided people, and that division is constantly reproduced through media outrage cycles, algorithmic feeds, partisan branding, and the transformation of politics into identity and spectacle. Politics become entertainment, elections become marketing campaigns, citizens become consumers, and democracy becomes a performance carried out on behalf of capital. The result is a population that is angry at each other instead of the structures governing their lives and causing their problems. But beneath all of the spectacle, the material reality remains the same. Most people work longer hours for less security, while a tiny ownership class accumulates unprecedented amounts of wealth. This is not a failure of the system. This is a system functioning as intended. So the question is not which party will save us. The question is, why would parties funded by corporations, structured around protecting capital, and embedded within a capitalist state ever dismantle a system that gives them power? Real change has never come primarily from presidents, senators, or billionaires acting out of kindness. It has come from organized pressure from below, from labor movements, from tenant unions, civil rights organizations, anti-war movements, mass collective actions capable of disrupting the normal flow of profit and forcing concessions from the ruling class, because power does not concede anything voluntarily. And until people begin to see politics not as a battle between red and blue, but as a conflict between those who own society and those who make it function, the cycle will continue. Different slogans, different politicians, different campaign ads. Same system, same class rule, same exploitation.
We declare class war! Take up bombs on the floor!